Growing up, I thought every family had their golden child. I just never expected the scales to tip so dramatically that it would destroy everything my father built. What started as a simple conversation about rent turned into the most expensive lesson my dad ever learned about favoritism. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Marcus, and for 23 years, I believed that hard work and dedication would eventually earn me the same respect my older brother Devin received effortlessly. We lived in a modest two-story house in suburban Cleveland, where my father, Robert Henley, worked as a shift supervisor at the local steel plant. My mother, Linda, had passed away when I was 16, leaving Dad to raise two very different sons on his own. Devin was everything Dad wanted in a son. At 25, he had Dad's broad shoulders, his easy smile, and apparently his complete approval for every decision he made. Devin worked part-time at a local garage, spent most evenings playing video games in his childhood bedroom, and somehow managed to convince everyone that his laid-back approach to life was actually a sign of wisdom rather than laziness. I took a different path. After high school, I enrolled in community college for business administration while working full-time at a logistics company. My days started at 5 in the morning with my warehouse shift. Then I'd rush to afternoon classes and finish with evening study sessions that kept me up until midnight. I'd been doing this routine for 3 years, slowly building toward my associate degree and a promotion to management. The difference in how Dad treated us became crystal clear on a Tuesday evening in March. I was at the kitchen table, textbooks spread everywhere, working on a supply chain management assignment when Devin burst through the front door with news that would change everything. "Dad, you're not going to believe this," Devin announced, practically bouncing with excitement. "Remember Tony from the garage? His cousin was selling his 2019 Mustang GT, and I got it for $12,000. Can you believe that deal?" I looked up from my textbook to see Dad's face light up like Devin had just announced he'd won the lottery. "A Mustang GT? Son, that's incredible. How'd you swing a deal like that?" Devin shrugged with that characteristic grin. "Right place, right time, I guess. Tony's cousin needed cash fast for some business thing. I had my savings from the garage. Work and boom, dream car achieved." What followed was 15 minutes of Dad practically worshipping Devin's financial acumen. "That's my boy," he kept saying, clapping Devin on the back. "Always knew you had a head for business. Smart investment, son. That car's gonna hold its value and you'll look good driving it too." I tried to focus on my homework, but it was impossible to ignore the celebration happening 3 feet away. Dad was talking about Devin's natural instincts and street smarts, like he'd just negotiated a Fortune 500 merger instead of buying a used car from a friend's cousin. "We should take it for a spin," Dad suggested. "I want to see what she can do." They headed out together, leaving me alone with my textbooks and a growing knot in my stomach. It wasn't that I begrudged Devin his car. Okay, maybe I did a little, but the contrast in treatment was becoming impossible to ignore. When I'd bought my reliable but unglamorous Honda Civic 2 years earlier, Dad's only comment had been about hoping I hadn't overpaid. They returned an hour later, both grinning and talking about horsepower and acceleration. Dad was more animated than I'd seen him in months. "Marcus, you should hear this thing roar," he called out as they walked back into the kitchen. "Your brother really knows how to pick them." I managed a smile and offered congratulations to Devin, who accepted them with his usual good-natured confidence. The evening settled back into its normal rhythm, Dad watching TV in his recliner, Devin on his phone, and me hunched over my books. But apparently, the night's festivities had given Dad some ideas about household management. "Marcus," he said, during a commercial break, not even looking away from the television, "I've been thinking. You're 23 now, got a steady job, almost done with school. Maybe it's time you started contributing more around here." I looked up from my economics textbook. "Contributing more?" "Dad, I buy my own food, pay for my own gas, cover my own school expenses? I'm talking about rent, he interrupted, finally turning to face me. $500 a month seems fair. You can start next month. The words hit me like a physical blow. $500 was nearly a quarter of my monthly income from the warehouse job. Between school expenses, car payments, and my modest savings, plan that would eliminate any financial breathing room I had. Dad, I'm trying to save money for when I finish school. I've been planning to move out once I get my degree and the promotion. Plans change, son. You're an adult living in my house. Adults pay rent. I glanced toward the living room where Devin was sprawled on the couch, completely absorbed in his phone. What about Devin? He's older than me, and he's been living here longer since graduation. Dad's expression shifted, and I immediately knew I'd said the wrong thing. Devin just made a smart investment in his future. That car is going to help him get better jobs, make connections. He's thinking long-term. But Dad, I'm literally in school for business. I'm working toward a management position. How is that not thinking long-term? Book learning is one thing, Marcus. Street smarts are another. Your brother understands value, opportunity. That's why he got such a good deal on the Mustang. The logic was so twisted I couldn't even begin to untangle it. Devin spending his savings on a car was smart investing, but me spending money on education and career advancement was somehow less valuable. The conversation was spiraling into territory. That felt dangerous, but I couldn't stop myself. So, because Devin bought a car, he doesn't have to pay rent. How does that make sense? Dad stood up from his chair, and I recognized the warning signs. His jaw tightened, and his voice dropped to that low, controlled tone that had terrified me. As a kid. What makes sense is that I'm the one who pays the mortgage on this house. I'm the one who decides what's fair. And what's fair is that you start acting like the adult you claim to be. I am acting like an adult. I work full-time, I go to school, I take care of my responsibilities. Then you can take care of this responsibility too. $500 a month, starting April 1st. End of discussion. He turned back to the television, effectively dismissing. I sat there for a moment, staring at my textbook but seeing nothing. The numbers and theories about supply and demand suddenly felt meaningless compared to the very real economic pressure Dad had just placed on my shoulders. Devin finally looked up from his phone. Dude, don't stress about it. 500 isn't that bad. I paid way more than that for my apartment before I moved back home. When did you move back home? I asked, genuinely confused. Like 2 years ago. After Sarah and I broke up, Dad said I could stay as long as I needed to get back on my feet. 2 years. Devin had been living rent-free for 2 years while I'd been busting my ass with work and school, and now suddenly I was the one who needed to start paying rent. The month after Devin bought himself a sports car. How much rent do you pay? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Devin looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Rent? I help out. Around the house, you know. I fixed Dad's lawnmower last summer and I'm always available if he needs help with projects. So that was it. Devin's contribution to the household was occasional handyman work, while I was expected to fork over $6,000 a year in rent. The favoritism I'd always suspected was now laid bare with mathematical precision. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, doing mental calculations. $500 a month would drain my savings account within 6 months if I didn't find additional income. I could pick up extra shifts at the warehouse, but that would mean dropping classes, which would delay my degree and the promotion I'd been working toward. I could take out student loans to cover living expenses, but that would mean graduating with debt instead of the clean slate I'd been planning. Every solution I considered required sacrificing some part of the future I'd been building, and all because Dad had decided that Devin's car purchase somehow exempted him from adult responsibilities while simultaneously triggering new ones for me. The unfairness of it burned in my chest, But what hurt more was the casual way it had been delivered. Like Dad had been looking for an excuse to impose this burden, and Devon's celebration had simply provided the perfect moment. The message was clear. One son was rewarded for his choices, while the other was punished for his stability. As I finally drifted off to sleep, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that maybe it was time to stop playing by rules that were rigged against me. Maybe it was time to teach Dad exactly what it meant when someone who actually contributed to the household decided to take their contributions elsewhere. I had no idea how right that voice would turn out to be. The next few weeks passed in a haze of resentment and financial anxiety. I'd started picking up weekend shifts at the warehouse, which meant my Saturday study sessions became a thing of the past. My grades hadn't suffered yet, but I could feel the pressure building. Meanwhile, Devon's daily routine remained unchanged. Roll out of bed around 10, work his part-time shifts at the garage, and spend evenings either working on his new Mustang or cruising around town with friends. Dad's attitude toward me had shifted too. Where before he'd been indifferent to my achievements, now he seemed almost smug about the rent arrangement. He'd make comments about learning responsibility and earning your keep whenever I passed through the living room with my work uniform or textbooks. It felt like he was enjoying having something to hold over me. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in late April. I was in the kitchen making a quick dinner before heading to my night class when I overheard a phone conversation that changed everything. Dad was in the living room, talking to his brother Mike in Detroit. Their voices carried easily through the thin walls of our old house, and while I hadn't been intentionally eavesdropping, certain words grabbed my attention and wouldn't let go. "Yeah, Devon's doing real good," Dad was saying. "Got himself a nice car working steadily at the garage. I tell you, Mike, that boy's got his head on straight." There was a pause while Uncle Mike responded, then Dad continued. "Marcus? Oh, he's fine. Finally got him paying rent, which he should have been doing all along. $500 a month. Figured it was time he learned what the real world costs." Another pause. Then Dad laughed, and the sound made my stomach clench. "Well, here's the thing," Dad said, and his voice dropped conspiratorially. "I'm not actually hurting for the money, you know. The plant's been good to me. Overtime's been solid. But I figured Marcus needed a reality check. Kid's been walking around here thinking his college classes make him better than everyone else." I froze with a forkful of pasta halfway to my mouth. "What am I doing with the money?" Dad chuckled. "Funny you should ask. Been putting it into a savings account for Devon. Figure the kid's gonna need a down payment when he's ready to buy a house or start a business. His rent money's gonna give him a nice head start." The fork clattered against my plate. I wasn't paying rent to help with household expenses. I was being forced to fund my brother's future while sacrificing my own financial stability. Dad was literally taking money from one son to give to the other, and he was laughing about it. "Marcus doesn't need to know about that," Dad continued. "Kids need to learn that life isn't fair, and the sooner he figures that out, the better off he'll be. Besides, Devon's always been better with money. Remember when they were kids? Devon would save his allowance for months, but Marcus would spend his on books or those computer programs." I wanted to burst into the living room and confront him, but something held me back. Maybe it was the casual cruelty in his voice, or maybe it was the dawning realization that this went deeper than simple favoritism. This was systematic, deliberate, and it had probably been going on longer than I realized. Instead, I quietly put my dinner in the refrigerator and slipped upstairs to my room. I needed to think, and I needed to figure out exactly what I was dealing with. Over the next week, I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. I noticed that when groceries ran low, Dad would casually mention that I should pick up milk or bread on my way home from work. When Devon mentioned needing new tires for his Mustang, Dad offered to loan him the money. When I'd asked about borrowing $20 for a required textbook the previous semester, Dad had suggested I should budget better. I started keeping a mental tally of every financial interaction in our household. Dad paid the mortgage and utilities, that was true. But I'd been covering my own food costs for over a year. I did my own laundry, cleaned my own space, and never asked for money for anything school or work related. Devin, meanwhile, ate Dad's groceries, had his laundry done with the family wash, and received regular loans that were never mentioned again. The most infuriating part was that Dad genuinely seemed to believe his own narrative. He'd convinced himself that Devin was the responsible, mature son, while I was some kind of entitled burden. The fact that I worked more hours, maintained better grades, and asked for less help was somehow evidence of character flaws rather than strengths. But it was a conversation I accidentally witnessed between Dad and Devin that finally pushed me over the edge. I'd come home early from work the following Tuesday. My supervisor had sent me home after we'd finished loading a shipment, ahead of schedule. I walked into the house expecting it to be empty, since Devin usually worked until 6 and Dad didn't get home until after 7. Instead, I found them both in the kitchen, sharing a beer and talking in the relaxed way that I'd always envied. They didn't hear me come in, and something about their body language made me pause in the hallway rather than announcing my presence. So I was thinking, Devin was saying, maybe it's time I started looking for my own place again. I've got some money saved up, and with the Mustang paid off, I could probably swing a decent apartment. Dad shook his head immediately. Don't rush into anything, son. Market's crazy right now. Rent prices are through the roof. You're smart to stay here and build up your savings. But I feel kind of bad, you know? Marcus is paying rent, and I'm just freeloading. I held my breath, waiting for Dad's response. You're not freeloading, Dad said firmly. You help out around here plenty. And besides, you're being smart with your money. That's exactly what I want to see from you. Still, it seems unfair. Life isn't fair, Devin. It's about making smart choices and recognizing opportunities. Marcus chose to spend his money on college classes instead of building real-world skills. You chose to learn a trade and make connections in the automotive industry. His choices have consequences, just like yours do. Devin nodded, though he still looked slightly uncomfortable. I guess. It just feels weird having him pay rent while I don't. Dad leaned forward, and his voice took on that teaching tone he'd used when we were kids, and he was explaining something important. Son, let me tell you something about Marcus. He's always been book smart, but he's never understood how the world actually works. He thinks that because he gets good grades and follows rules, everything should be handed to him. Dad, that's not really... Let me finish. Marcus needs to learn that success isn't about what you know. It's about who you know and how you handle yourself. You've got natural instincts for that. You make friends easily, people like you. You understand value and opportunity. Those are skills you can't learn from a textbook. I pressed myself against the hallway wall, afraid to move and risk making noise. The rent money is teaching Marcus something he needs to learn, Dad continued. And honestly, it's going toward something good. I'm putting every penny into an account for you. When you're ready to make a real investment, maybe start your own shop or buy property, you'll have a foundation to work from. Devin was quiet for a long moment. You're giving Marcus's rent money to me? I'm investing in my son's future, Dad corrected. The son who shows the most promise and makes the smartest decisions. That's what fathers do. But Dad, Marcus works really hard. He's trying to better himself. Marcus is trying to better himself with other people's ideas about what success looks like, Dad interrupted. College, corporate jobs, climbing ladders that other people built. You're thinking for yourself, making your own opportunities. That's the difference. I'd heard enough. I quietly backed toward the front door, opened and closed it loudly enough to announce my arrival, then walked normally into the kitchen. Hey guys, I said, forcing my voice to sound casual. Home early today. Dad and Devin both looked slightly guilty, though they tried to hide it. How was work? Dad asked. Good. Productive. I grabbed a bottle of water from the refrigerator, hyper-aware of the tension in the room. "Devin, how's the car running?" "Great," Devin replied, but his usual enthusiasm was muted. "Really great." I nodded and headed toward the stairs. "I've got some studying to do. See you guys later." As I climbed to my room, I could hear them resuming their conversation in hushed tones, but I'd already heard everything I needed to hear. That night, I sat at my desk with a notebook, writing down everything I could remember from both conversations. The systematic nature of Dad's favoritism was even worse than I'd imagined. He wasn't just treating us differently. He was actively sabotaging my financial future to benefit Devin's. But more than that, he was doing it with complete conviction that he was right. In his mind, he wasn't being unfair. He was being practical. He'd decided that Devin had more potential and therefore deserved more investment. I was just a revenue source to fund his favorite son's dreams. The betrayal cut deeper than simple unfairness. Dad had looked me in the eye and demanded rent money for learning responsibility, while secretly funneling that money to my brother. He'd made me feel guilty for questioning the arrangement while privately justifying it as character building. As I stared at my notes, a plan began to form in my mind. If Dad wanted to play games with money and teach lessons about how the world worked, maybe it was time he learned a few lessons himself. He'd made it clear that he valued Devin's success over mine, and that my contributions to the household were just resources to be exploited. Fine. It was time to show him exactly what happened when his most reliable source of income and household stability decided to stop playing by his rigged rules. I had 2 weeks to put everything in place. 2 weeks to arrange a demonstration that would teach my father the difference between the son he thought he valued and the son he actually depended on. The first step was research. Over the next several days, I spent my lunch breaks at the warehouse, using their computer to search for apartments in nearby neighborhoods. I wasn't just browsing casually. I was building a comprehensive database of options, prices, and availability dates. Every listing went into a spreadsheet I'd created, categorized by distance from work, monthly cost, and move-in requirements. What I discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. There were several decent one-bedroom apartments within my budget range, especially if I was willing to live 20 minutes further from campus. The security deposits were manageable with my current savings, and a few landlords were offering move-in specials for immediate occupancy. But the real revelation came when I started calculating the actual costs of Dad's household expenses. I'd always assumed that the mortgage, utilities, and basic maintenance on our old house were substantial burdens. A little digging into public records and utility rate comparisons told a different story. Dad's mortgage payments were less than $800 a month. He'd bought the house 15 years ago when prices were much lower. The average utility bill for a house our size ran about $250 monthly. Property taxes added another $300 per month. Even accounting for maintenance, repairs, and miscellaneous expenses, Dad's total housing costs were probably around $1,400 monthly. Devin and I combined were bringing in nearly $1,000 of indirect value through groceries we bought, household items we purchased, and services we provided. My rent alone covered more than a third of Dad's actual housing expenses. If Devin had been paying equivalent rent, they would have been profiting from having us there. The numbers painted a clear picture. Dad wasn't struggling financially, and our presence in the house was economically beneficial to him. The rent demand wasn't about teaching me responsibility. It was about maximizing the benefit he could extract from the arrangement while maintaining the fiction that he was doing me a favor. Armed with this information, I moved to phase 2 of my research, understanding exactly what I contributed to the household beyond rent money. I started keeping detailed records of everything I did around the house. Grocery runs, cleaning supplies I purchased, times I fixed things that broke, hours I spent maintaining the yard or helping with projects. The list grew longer than I'd expected. In a typical week, I was contributing about 15 hours of unpaid, Labor to household maintenance. I'd developed a routine of handling most of the grocery shopping because my work schedule allowed for weekday trips when stores were less crowded. I'd taken over yard work 2 summers ago when Dad's back started, bothering him after long shifts at the plant. I'd installed new bathroom fixtures, painted the guest bedroom, and spent countless weekends helping Devin work on various automotive projects. Beyond the labor, there were the intangible contributions. I was the one who remembered to pay bills when Dad was working double shifts. I handled correspondence with repair technicians and service providers. I was the family's unofficial tech support, managing everything from Wi-Fi issues to helping Dad navigate new software at work. The more I documented, the clearer it became that my departure would create problems Dad hadn't considered. He'd been so focused on the financial extraction that he'd overlooked the practical value of having a responsible, capable adult managing many of the household's background operations. But I needed to be strategic about this. Simply moving out wouldn't teach him the lesson he needed to learn. It would just allow him to paint me as the ungrateful son who abandoned his family. I needed him to understand the full scope of what he was losing and why he was losing it. That's when I remembered a conversation I'd had with my supervisor at the warehouse, Janet Morrison. She'd mentioned that the company was expanding operations to their facility in Columbus, about 2 hours south of Cleveland. They were looking for reliable employees willing to relocate for supervisory positions that came with significant pay increases. I'd dismissed the opportunity at the time because it would mean leaving school and starting over in a new city. But now, it looked like the perfect solution to multiple problems. During my next shift, I found Janet in her office and asked if the Columbus opportunity was still available. "Marcus, I'm surprised," she said, looking up from her computer. "Last time I mentioned it, you seemed pretty committed to staying local for school." "My situation has changed," I told her. "I'm interested in hearing more about the position and the timeline." Janet leaned back in her chair, studying me with the careful attention she gave to complex logistics problems. "The position is warehouse supervisor for their new distribution center. It's a 40% pay increase from what you're making now, plus they cover relocation expenses and provide temporary housing for the first 60 days while you find permanent accommodations. 40% more money. That would put me at nearly $60,000 annually. More than enough to live comfortably while finishing my degree through online classes or transfer credits to a Columbus area school." "What's the timeline?" I asked. "They need someone within 6 weeks. Ideally, they'd want you to start the first week of June to help with the facility setup and staff training." 6 weeks. That would give me time to finish the current semester and leave Dad with a month to figure out replacement arrangements for everything I handled around the house. "I'm very interested," I told her. "What do I need to do to apply?" Janet smiled. "Honestly, Marcus, I've already recommended you to their HR department. You're exactly what they're looking for. Reliable, experienced, and smart enough to grow with the company. If you want the job, it's yours." I felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervous energy. This was bigger than just moving out of Dad's house. It was a complete reset of my life trajectory. Better job, better pay, independence, and the chance to finish my education without the constant stress of navigating family politics. "Can I have a few days to think it over and handle some personal arrangements?" "Of course. Just let me know by next Friday and we'll get the paperwork started." Walking back to my workstation, I felt lighter than I had in months. The pieces of my plan were falling into place in ways I couldn't have anticipated. That evening, I started Phase 3, documenting everything I needed Dad to understand about the transition. I created detailed lists of household responsibilities, vendor contacts, maintenance schedules, and financial obligations that I'd been managing. I wanted to be thorough, not out of spite, but because I genuinely didn't want the house to fall apart after I left. The guest bathroom faucet needed replacement parts that I'd been planning to install the following weekend. The lawnmower required an oil change and new spark plug before the growing season kicked into high gear. The internet service was due for renewal in July, and I'd been researching better packages that would save money while improving speed. There were dozens of small but important details that I'd absorbed over the years of living there as an adult. Dad probably wasn't even aware that most of these things needed attention, because I'd been handling them proactively. I also started transferring important information out of my personal accounts. The household utility companies had my phone number as the primary contact for service issues. The landscaping service I'd hired last summer for the major yard work had my information on file. Several local businesses knew me as the Henley family representative for various services. All of this would need to be updated, and Dad would need to take over relationships he didn't know existed. By Thursday, I had everything organized into a comprehensive transition document, 23 pages of information about how his household actually functioned, what it would cost to replace the services I provided, and what he'd need to do to maintain the systems I'd put in place. But the document was just one part of my plan. The real impact would come from the timing and presentation of my departure. I'd decided to accept the Columbus job offer, which meant I had exactly 38 days to execute the most important conversation of my life. I needed to tell Dad. I was leaving in a way that made him understand why, what it would cost him, and how his favoritism had created the very situation he'd tried to avoid. Devin would be shocked, but he'd ultimately be fine. Dad would be forced to confront the difference between the son he'd been investing in and the son who'd been actually maintaining his life. The irony was perfect. In trying to teach me about responsibility and consequences, Dad was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his own life about taking reliable people for granted. Friday morning, I called Janet and accepted the Columbus position. The relief in her voice told me I'd made the right choice professionally, but it was the excitement in my own voice that told me I'd made the right choice personally. It was time to stop being the undervalued son and start being the independent adult Dad claimed he wanted me to become. I chose Sunday evening for the conversation. Dad would be relaxed after his weekend. Devin would likely be out with friends, and I'd have privacy to present everything without interruption. I spent the afternoon reviewing my transition document one final time, making sure every detail was accurate and every recommendation was clear. At 6:30, I found Dad in his usual spot. Recliner reclined, beer in hand, watching a baseball game on TV. The domestic scene was so normal it almost made me reconsider the magnitude of what I was about to do. Almost. "Dad, we need to talk. Can you pause the game for a few minutes?" He looked at me with mild annoyance. "Can it wait until after the inning? Bases are loaded." "It's important, and it's going to take more than a few minutes." Something in my tone must have registered because he muted the television and shifted to face me, though he didn't move from the recliner. "What's on your mind?" I sat down on the couch with my folder of documents, suddenly aware that this conversation would change our relationship forever. There would be no going back from what I was about to reveal. I'm moving to Columbus in 5 weeks. I've accepted a supervisor position with the company, and I'll be relocating permanently. Dad stared at me for several seconds, processing the information. "Columbus? That's 2 hours away. 2.5, actually. The company is covering my relocation expenses and providing temporary housing while I find an apartment." "What about school? You're almost done with your degree." "I'll finish through online classes or transfer credits. The pay increase will more than cover the additional tuition costs." Dad's expression shifted from confusion to something that looked like betrayal. "You're just going to abandon your education? After all the work you've put in?" "I'm not abandoning my education. I'm adapting it to fit a better opportunity. The supervisory position comes with management training and advancement potential that will be more valuable than my associate degree." "Marcus, this is crazy. You're making a mistake. Jobs like that, they'll work you to death and then replace you with someone younger when you burn out." I opened my folder and pulled out the first document, a detailed breakdown of my new compensation package. The base salary is $58,000, with performance bonuses that could bring it up to $65,000. That's more than twice what I'm making now, with full benefits and a clear advancement track. Dad took the paper but barely glanced at it. Money isn't everything, son. You've got stability here, family support. Family support? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. Dad, we need to talk about what family support actually looks like in this house. His jaw tightened. What's that supposed to mean? I pulled out the second document, my detailed record of household contributions. This is a breakdown of everything I do around here that isn't covered by the rent I pay you. 15 hours a week of maintenance, repairs, yard work, and household management. If you had to hire people to do this work, it would cost you about $400 monthly. Dad glanced at the list, then set it aside dismissively. That's just normal helping out. Every family member contributes. Does Devin contribute? 15 hours a week of unpaid labor? Devin helps when I ask him to. When did you last ask him to grocery shop, handle utility issues, coordinate with repair services, or manage household finances? Dad was quiet, but his expression was growing defensive. I pulled out the third document. This is a record of every financial interaction between family members over the past 6 months. Devin's received $840 in loans that have never been repaid or mentioned again. I've received 0 financial assistance while paying $3,000 in rent. Those weren't loans, they were— What were they, Dad? He struggled for a moment, then fell back on his standard justification. Devin needed help getting established. The car, some repairs, work clothes. Getting established? He's 25 years old and has been living here rent-free for 2 years. When exactly does the establishment period end? Dad stood up from his recliner, and I recognized the warning signs of his temper flaring. I don't like your tone, Marcus. I'm your father, and I don't owe you explanations for how I manage my household or my money. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the point where Dad would try to shut down the conversation with parental authority. But I was ready. You're absolutely right, I said calmly. You don't owe me explanations. And I don't owe you rent, household labor, or continued residence in a situation that's financially and emotionally unsustainable. I pulled out the fourth document, the comprehensive transition guide I'd prepared. This is everything you'll need to know about managing the household systems I've been handling: vendor contacts, maintenance schedules, account information, and recommendations for services you'll need to hire. Dad took the document, and I watched his face change as he flipped through the pages. The sheer volume of information seemed to surprise him. The lawn service contract expires in June, I continued. I've been handling the renewal negotiations, but you'll need to take that over. The internet service needs upgrading before July. I've researched the best options, and the information is on page 12. The guest bathroom faucet needs those replacement parts I mentioned, and the installation instructions are on page 18. With each item I mentioned, Dad looked more overwhelmed. I don't think he'd realized how much background work went into maintaining his comfortable domestic situation. Grocery shopping has been my responsibility for about 2 years now, I continued. I've included the preferred vendors, bulk purchasing schedules, and budget breakdowns. You'll probably want to transition that responsibility to Devin or handle it yourself. Marcus, slow down. This is a lot to process. There's more. I pulled out the final document. This is a financial analysis of what my departure will cost you monthly. The rent income you'll lose, the services you'll need to hire, and the increased costs you'll face when Devin inevitably needs more financial support to cover responsibilities he's never had. Dad sat back down heavily, staring at the papers in his lap. For the first time in our conversation, he looked genuinely shaken. I estimate you'll need to replace my contributions with about $1,200 in monthly expenses, I said. That's assuming Devin steps up significantly, which, based on his track record, seems unlikely. Why are you doing this? Dad asked quietly. If you needed something, if there was a problem, you should have talked to me. I did talk to you. I asked about the fairness of the rent arrangement. I questioned why Devin didn't have similar responsibilities. You told me life wasn't fair and that I needed to learn adult responsibilities. Dad looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been regret in his eyes. So I learned, I continued. I learned that adults don't accept unfair arrangements just because someone in authority demands it. I learned that family support should be mutual, not extractive. And I learned that my skills and work ethic are valuable enough that other people will pay well for them. Is the Columbus job real? The Columbus job is real. I start June 1st. My last day of rent payment is May 31st. Dad was quiet for a long time, staring at the transition documents. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. I never meant for you to feel unwanted here. I don't think you meant a lot of things, Dad. But impact matters more than intent. He nodded slowly, still not meeting my eyes. What about Devin? Does he know? I'll tell Devin tomorrow. But Dad, this isn't about Devin. This is about you and me and the choices you made about how to treat your sons. Is there a way to fix this? To make it work? I'd been dreading this question because I'd known it would be the hardest to answer honestly. Part of me wanted to believe we could repair our relationship, establish new boundaries, and create a healthier dynamic. But a larger part of me knew that the patterns were too deeply established, and the resentment too profound. The Columbus. Opportunity is too good to pass up, I said finally. Even if we could fix the family issues, this is the right career move for me. Dad nodded again, accepting the finality of my decision. When you're settled there, will you stay in touch? Of course. You're still my father. But our relationship is going to be different. It has to be. We sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Finally, Dad picked up the remote and unmuted the baseball game, though he didn't really seem to be watching it. I'm going to need some time to go through all this information, he said, gesturing to the documents. Take whatever time you need. I'll be around for 5 more weeks if you have questions. As I headed toward the stairs, Dad called after me. Marcus? For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've accomplished. The job, the opportunity, you earned that. I paused on the bottom step. Thank you. That means something. But as I climbed to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that his pride was too little, too late. The damage had been done, the lesson had been learned, and the consequences were already in motion. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of raised voices coming from the kitchen. I checked my phone, 7:15, which meant Dad was getting ready for work and apparently having a heated discussion with someone. As I got dressed, I realized the other voice belonged to Devin. Told you this was going to happen eventually, Devin was saying as I reached the bottom of the stairs. You knew about this? Dad's voice was sharp with accusation. I knew Marcus was unhappy. Anyone with eyes could see that. The rent thing was never fair, Dad. I paused in the hallway, torn, between joining the conversation and giving them privacy to work through whatever this was. Fair? Dad's voice rose. I'll tell you what's fair. Fair is adult children contributing to the household they live in. Fair is learning responsibility and… Dad, stop. Devin's voice was firmer than I'd ever heard it. Just stop with that. You and I both know the rent wasn't about teaching responsibility. There was a long silence. Then Dad's voice came back quieter but more defensive. What's that supposed to mean? It means I know about the savings account. My stomach dropped. Devin knew about Dad's secret plan to funnel my rent money to him. You've been taking Marcus's rent and putting it aside for me, Devin continued. Did you think I wouldn't figure that out? You mentioned it twice in the last month, Dad, about having money set aside for when I'm ready to buy a house or start a business. That money was always meant to help you. Help me with what? I never asked you to take money from Marcus to give to me. I didn't even know you were doing it until recently, and it makes me sick. I'd never heard Devin sound angry before. Frustrated, maybe, or mildly annoyed, but never genuinely angry. Devin, you don't understand the bigger picture here. The bigger picture is that you've been playing favorites so obviously that you made one of your sons feel like a stranger in his own home. And now he's leaving, and you're acting surprised about it. I decided this conversation had gone far enough without my input. I walked into the kitchen to find Dad standing by the coffee maker in his work clothes, looking haggard and defensive. Devin was seated at the table, still in his pajamas, but wide awake and clearly agitated. "Morning," I said, trying to gauge the temperature of the room. Devin looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Marcus, I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not saying anything sooner. About the rent, about how Dad's been treating you. I should have spoken up." Dad made a frustrated noise. "There's nothing to apologize for. This family has always supported each other." "No, Dad," Devin interrupted. "This family has always supported me. There's a difference." The honesty in Devin's voice surprised me. I'd expected him to be defensive about his privileged position, not critical of it. "Look," Devin continued, turning back to me, "I know about the savings account. I know Dad's been taking your rent money and setting it aside for me. I didn't ask for that, and I don't want it." Dad's face flushed red. "That money is an investment in your future." "It's stolen money," Devin said flatly. "You took it from Marcus under false pretenses. That's not an investment. It's theft." "Watch your mouth," Dad snapped. "I'm still your father, and this is still my house." "And Marcus is still your son," Devin shot back. "But you've been treating him like a tenant, who happens to share your DNA." I sat down at the table, fascinated by this side of Devin I'd never seen before. He was actually standing up to Dad, something I'd been trying to do for years with limited success. "Devin, you don't need to—" I started. "Yes, I do." He turned to face me fully. "Marcus, I've been a coward about this whole situation. I knew it wasn't fair. I knew you were getting screwed, and I said nothing because it was easier for me." Dad slammed his coffee mug down on the counter. "This is ridiculous. Both of you are being ridiculous. Families help each other. Families make sacrifices." "What sacrifices have you made for Marcus?" Devin asked. "What sacrifices have I made? Because from where I'm sitting, the only person in this family who's been making sacrifices is the one who's moving to Columbus." Dad opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. "I called in sick to work today," Devin said, his voice calmer now. "I figured we needed to talk this through as a family before Marcus leaves." "You called in sick?" Dad looked genuinely shocked. Devin never missed work, and he certainly never made family drama a priority over his responsibilities. "Yeah, because apparently, I'm the only one in this family who hasn't completely lost perspective on what's important." Devin stood up and walked to the refrigerator, pulling out ingredients for breakfast. "Marcus, you want some eggs? I figure if we're going to have a family crisis, we might as well be fed." The casual way he said it broke some of the tension in the room. Despite everything, I almost smiled. "Sure." As Devin started cooking, he kept talking. "Dad, I need you to understand something. The Columbus job isn't Marcus running away from family problems. It's Marcus choosing a better life over a situation where he's not valued. He's valued. Show me how." Devin cracked eggs into a pan with more force than necessary. "Show me one example in the last year where you treated Marcus like his contributions mattered. One time where you acknowledged what he does for this household." Dad was quiet, staring into his coffee. "You can't, can you?" Devin continued. "Because you've been so focused on what you thought I needed that you completely ignored what Marcus was giving. I never asked Marcus to do all those things. You didn't need to ask. That's what made him valuable. He saw what needed to be done and did it. But instead of appreciating that, you punished him for being responsible. Devin plated the eggs and set them in front of me, then started making more. Dad, do you have any idea what it's going to cost to replace everything Marcus does around here? He left me some kind of list. It's not just a list, it's a comprehensive manual for running your own household. The fact that he had to create that should tell you something about how much he was handling that you never noticed. Dad sat down at the table across from me, looking older than I'd seen him in years. I thought I was doing the right thing. Teaching, responsibility, preparing both of you for the real world. You were preparing Marcus for the real world, Devin said, setting a plate in front of Dad. But you were protecting me from it. That's not parenting. That's favoritism. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Dad flinched when Devin said it, but he didn't deny it. I know I screwed up, Dad said quietly. But I don't know how to fix it now. Devin sat down with his own plate, and for a moment we were just three men sharing breakfast and trying to figure out how we'd gotten to this point. You start by giving Marcus back his rent money, Devin said. All of it. What you took for the savings account plus what he's paid directly. Dad looked up sharply. That's over $4,000. Dad. Devin's voice was patient but firm. You stole $4,000 from one son to give to the other son. The least you can do is give it back. It wasn't stealing. What would you call it? I asked. The question came out quieter than I'd intended, but it carried weight. Dad looked at me, then at Devin, then back at his eggs. I'd call it a mistake. A big one. Mistakes can be corrected, Devin said. The question is whether you want to correct this one or just live with the consequences. Dad was quiet for a long time, eating mechanically while Devin and I waited. Finally, he looked up at me. If I give you the money back, if I admit I was wrong about the rent, would you consider staying? I'd been dreading this question because I knew my answer would hurt him. Dad, the Columbus job is a better opportunity than anything I'll find here. Even if we fixed every family issue, I'd still be making a mistake not to take it. He nodded, slowly. But you'd stay in touch? You'd come to visit? Of course. But our relationship needs to change. I can't go back to being the son who absorbs unfair treatment because it's easier than confronting it. I understand. Dad pushed his eggs around his plate. Devin, what about the savings account? I want you to give that money back to Marcus, Devin said immediately. Every penny. What he does with it is his business, but it was never mine to begin with. Dad nodded again. Okay, I'll transfer it today. The conversation wound down after that, but something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. Devin had stepped into a role I'd never seen him play, the mediator, the voice of reason, the one willing to call out unfairness even when it benefited him. As I headed upstairs to get ready for work, Devin caught my arm. Marcus, I really am sorry about all of it. I know. And Devin? Thank you for saying something. That took guts. He shrugged, but I could tell the acknowledgement meant something to him. Families should stick up for each other. I should have figured that out sooner. Maybe our family was finally learning what that actually meant. The week following our family breakfast conversation brought changes I hadn't anticipated. Dad had indeed transferred the money back to my account, $4,350 that appeared without fanfare or ceremony. He'd simply left a bank statement on my desk with a sticky note that read, "This belongs to you, Dad." But the money, while vindicating, wasn't the most significant change. The most significant change was watching my father struggle to function without systems he'd never realized existed. It started with small things. On Tuesday, he called me at work to ask which company handled our internet service, because the connection had gone down and he couldn't find any account information. I guided him through the process of finding the customer service number I'd saved in his phone under internet support, and helped him navigate the automated system. On Wednesday, he Stood in the kitchen for 10 minutes, staring at an empty refrigerator before asking if I knew what we usually bought for groceries. When I handed him the detailed shopping lists I'd been maintaining for 2 years, organized by store section and marked with preferred brands and bulk quantities, he looked at the papers like I'd given him a manual for operating a spacecraft. Thursday. Brought a minor crisis when the lawnmower wouldn't start. Dad spent an hour in the garage, growing increasingly frustrated, before Devin suggested they call me. I walked them through the seasonal maintenance routine I'd been performing every spring, checking the oil, replacing the spark plug, cleaning the air filter, and adding fresh gas with a stabilizer. "How did you know all this?" Dad asked as the mower roared to life. "YouTube and practice," I told him. "Same way I learned to fix the bathroom faucet, install the ceiling fan, and troubleshoot the water heater." By Friday, Dad looked genuinely overwhelmed. The reality of managing a household without someone proactively handling maintenance, organization, and planning was hitting him harder than I'd expected. But the real revelation came over the weekend, when Dad attempted to handle the grocery shopping himself. I was in my room Saturday morning when I heard him on the phone with someone, his voice increasingly agitated. Curious, I went downstairs to find him pacing the kitchen with his cell phone pressed to his ear. "Told you I've been shopping there for 15 years, he was saying. "Why would you need to see an ID for a check?" I realized he was talking to someone at the grocery store where I'd been doing our weekly shopping. The store where I'd built relationships with the staff, learned the schedules for restocking and sales, and established a routine that maximized efficiency and savings. "Fine, I'll use a card," Dad said, ending the call with obvious irritation. He looked at me standing in the doorway. "Since when do they need ID for checks at Miller's Market?" "They don't need ID if they know you," I said. "But you've never shopped there before." "I've been handling the grocery runs for 2 years. Dad stared at me. 2 years? 2 years. Every Saturday morning, plus midweek trips for fresh items. I know which cashiers are fastest, when they restock the sale items, and which departments to hit in what order for maximum efficiency." He sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "I didn't realize." "There's a lot you didn't realize, Dad. But you're learning." What followed was the most educational shopping trip of my father's adult life. I went with him to Miller's Market, not to take over, but to introduce him to the staff and explain the systems I'd developed. "This is my father, Robert," I told. "Janet, the weekend manager I'd worked with for months on large orders and bulk purchasing. He'll be taking over the family shopping." Janet smiled politely, but I could see her confusion. In 2 years of weekly visits, she'd never seen this man before. As we walked through the store, I explained the logic behind my routing. Produce first for the freshest selection, then frozen items last to minimize thawing time. I showed him the brands I'd researched for best value, the bulk items that were worth buying in quantity, and the seasonal patterns that affected pricing. "The chicken goes on sale every 3rd week," I explained as we stood in the meat section. "I buy enough to freeze and portion out. Same with ground beef and pork chops. It cuts the protein budget by about 30%. Dad was taking notes on his phone, looking like a student trying to absorb information for an exam he hadn't studied for. At the checkout, Janet rang up our items with practiced efficiency. "Your son's got this whole operation down to a science," she told Dad. "Always knows exactly what he wants, never holds up the line, pays attention to the sales cycles. We're going to miss having him come through." "Miss him?" Dad looked confused. "He mentioned he's moving to Columbus soon. We'll miss a customer who actually pays attention to what we're doing." Dad looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You told them you were leaving?" "I told the people I interact with regularly that I'd be moving and you'd be taking over. I thought that was considerate." As we loaded groceries into Dad's truck, he was unusually quiet. Finally, as we drove home, he spoke up. "How much time do you spend on this? Shopping, I mean." 2 hours on Saturday mornings for the main shop, maybe 30 minutes midweek for fresh items. plus the time I spend planning meals, checking sales flyers, and maintaining the shopping lists. Planning meals? I realized we'd uncovered another system he'd been oblivious to. Dad, what did you think happened to make sure we had food that worked together? That there were ingredients for complete meals instead of random items? He was quiet for several blocks. I thought food just appeared. Food appeared because I planned menus, checked what we already had, and shopped systematically. Otherwise, you end up with a refrigerator full of random ingredients that don't make complete meals. Jesus, he muttered. Sunday brought another revelation when Dad attempted to tackle the yard work that I'd been managing for the past 2 summers. I watched from my bedroom window as he stood in the middle of our half-acre lawn, looking like a general surveying a battlefield he didn't understand. The front yard needs mowing, but the back needs edging and weed treatment first. The flower beds required weeding and mulching. The hedges were overgrown and needed trimming. The sprinkler system had 2 broken heads that needed replacement before the growing season kicked into high gear. After an hour of watching Dad walk around the yard making false starts, Devin came upstairs to my room. "He's having some kind of breakdown out there," Devin said, looking out my window. "Should we help him?" "He needs to understand what he's taking on," I said. "But yeah, we should probably help before he hurts himself." We went outside to find Dad sitting on the back porch steps, sweating and looking defeated. "This is more complicated than I thought," he admitted as we approached. "It's not complicated if you know the system," I told him. "But there is a system. Want me to walk you through it?" What followed was a 3-hour education in suburban lawn maintenance. I showed Dad the schedule I followed, which areas to mow first and why, how to adjust the mower height for different grass types, where the sprinkler controls were located, and how to program seasonal watering cycles. Devin, to his credit, jumped in to help. I realized he'd been observing my yard work routine for years without understanding the complexity involved. "You do all this every weekend?" Devin asked as we replaced the broken sprinkler heads. "Not all of it every weekend. I rotate tasks based on seasonal needs and weather conditions. Spring is heavy on setup and repair work. Summer is maintenance and watering management. Fall is cleanup and winterization." Dad was taking more notes on his phone, looking increasingly overwhelmed. "How did you learn all this?" "Trial and error, mostly. Plus research when something broke or when I wanted to improve efficiency." As we finished up, Dad surveyed the transformed yard, freshly mowed, properly edged, with repaired sprinklers and weeded flower beds. "This looks better than it has in years." "It looks the same as it does every week," I told him. "You just never paid attention to the condition of the yard before." That evening, Dad asked me to sit down with him in the living room. Devin was out with friends, so we had privacy for what felt like another important conversation. "Marcus, I owe you a bigger apology than I gave you," he started. "I didn't just treat you unfairly with the rent situation. I completely failed to see what you were contributing to this family." I wasn't sure how to respond to that, so I waited for him to continue. The grocery shopping, the yard work, the household, maintenance. I thought those things just happened. Or I thought Devin was helping more than he actually was. "I never realized you'd taken over managing this entire household." "I didn't take over managing it," I said. "I just handled things that needed handling." "But that's management, isn't it? Seeing what needs to be done and making sure it gets done. Planning ahead, maintaining systems, solving problems before they become crises." I nodded. "I guess so. In my job, we call that leadership. But somehow I didn't recognize it when it was happening in my own house." Dad rubbed his face with both hands. "How much money do you think it's going to cost me to replace everything you do?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the calculations I'd made weeks earlier. "If you hire people to handle the yard work, grocery delivery, household maintenance, and basic property management, you're looking at about $800 a month." $800? That's assuming Devin steps up to handle some of the basic tasks. If he doesn't, you're looking at closer to $1,200 monthly. And I was charging you $500 in rent while you were providing services worth $800. You were charging me $500 in rent while I was providing services worth $800 and paying for my own food, transportation, and personal expenses, I corrected. Dad was quiet for a long time. I really screwed this up, didn't I? Yeah, you did. Is there any way to fix it? I mean, I know you're taking the Columbus job, but is there a way to fix our relationship? I'd been thinking about this question for days. Dad, I think our relationship can be better than it was, but it can't go back to what it was. I can't go back to being the invisible son who absorbs unfair treatment. What would a better relationship look like? Honest communication, mutual respect. Recognition that I'm an adult who makes good decisions and contributes value wherever I am. Dad nodded slowly. I can do that. And it means no more favoritism. If you and Devin have a relationship that involves financial support and special treatment, that's between you and him. But don't pretend that family responsibilities are equally distributed when they're not. Fair enough. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both processing the changes that had happened in our family dynamic over the past week. For what it's worth, Dad said eventually, I'm proud of the man you've become. Not because of anything I did, but because of who you chose to be despite how I treated you. Thanks, Dad. That means something. And Marcus? When you're settled in Columbus, I hope you'll call sometimes. Not because you have to, but because you want to. I will. I promised. And for the first time in years, I meant it. As I headed upstairs, that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in our house for a long time. Peace. Not the peace of resolution exactly, but the peace of truth finally being acknowledged. The next 3 weeks would bring their own challenges as Dad continued learning to manage his household, and Devin stepped up to take on responsibilities he'd never had. But the foundation had shifted, and for the first time, it felt like we were building something honest. My phone buzzed with a text from my new supervisor in Columbus. Housing coordinator wants to schedule a call about your relocation. Package. Available Tuesday afternoon? I smiled as I typed back my confirmation. In 3 weeks, I'd be starting a new chapter of my life, one where my contributions were recognized, my efforts were rewarded, and my future was in my own hands. It had taken 23 years, but I was finally learning what it felt like to be valued. 3 weeks later, I was loading the last box into my Honda Civic while Dad and Devin stood in the driveway watching. The scene felt surreal. After years of feeling invisible in this house, my departure had become a family event. The transformation in our household dynamic over those final weeks had been remarkable to witness. Dad had thrown himself into learning the systems I'd maintained with the determination of someone who finally understood what he'd been taking for granted. Devin had stepped up in ways that surprised all of us, taking over grocery shopping duties and establishing his own maintenance routines. But perhaps the most significant change was in how they talked to me. Gone was the casual dismissal of my contributions or the assumption that my availability was unlimited. Instead, Dad would ask if I had time to walk him through something, and Devin would genuinely thank me when I helped him understand a household process. You sure you don't want to take the truck for the drive? Dad asked as I secured the final box. It's a long way to Columbus. I'm sure. The Civic has been reliable, and I'd rather have my own car down there than worry about returning. Yours. Devin handed me a wrapped package. Going away present. Don't open it until you get to Columbus. I was touched by the gesture. Thanks, Devin. You didn't need to do that. Yeah, I did. I had a lot to make up for. Dad approached with an envelope in his hand. This is for you, too. Consider it a consultation fee. I opened the envelope to find a check for $1,500. Dad, this is too much. It's not nearly enough, he interrupted. I calculated what I would have paid someone to create the household management systems you left me. $1,500 is actually a discount. I looked at the check, then at my father. You don't owe me money for helping family. I owe you money for work I never acknowledged or appreciated. There's a difference. As I hugged Devin goodbye, he whispered, "Call me if you need anything. And Marcus, I'm going to make sure things stay fair around here." I believed him. Over the past weeks, Devin had revealed a strength of character I'd never seen before. He'd started paying Dad rent, not because Dad asked, but because Devin realized it was the right thing to do. He'd taken over several of my household responsibilities and had done so competently and without complaint. Dad's goodbye was more emotional than I'd expected. Drive safe, call when you get there, and remember, you always have a place here if you need it. I know, Dad, and you have my number if you need help figuring something out. I won't abuse that privilege, he promised. The drive to Columbus gave me time to process everything that had happened. 6 weeks earlier, I'd been the invisible son paying rent while my brother lived for free. Now I was heading to a job that paid more than double my warehouse wages, with a savings account that included the return of my stolen rent money plus consultation fees. But more than the financial changes, something fundamental had shifted in how my family saw me. I wasn't just the responsible son anymore. I was the capable son, the valuable son, the son whose departure created problems they couldn't ignore. Columbus welcomed me with June sunshine and the excitement of genuine opportunity. The temporary housing the company provided was a furnished apartment complex designed for relocating employees, complete with a community center and networking events. My first day as warehouse supervisor exceeded every expectation I'd had about the position. The facility was state-of-the-art, the staff was professional and motivated, and my manager, Sarah Chen, treated me like a colleague rather than a subordinate from minute one. "Marcus, I've heard great things about your organizational skills and work ethic," she said during our initial meeting. "Janet Morrison spoke very highly of your ability to see systems and improve processes. Thank you. I'm excited to contribute here." Good, because we have some challenges that require exactly your kind of thinking. Our distribution efficiency has been lagging, and we need someone who can analyze current workflows and implement improvements. Sarah walked me through the facility, pointing out areas where they'd been struggling with coordination and efficiency. I felt something I'd never experienced at my old job: intellectual engagement. These weren't just tasks to be completed. They were problems to be solved, systems to be optimized, processes to be improved. Within my first week, I'd identified 3 bottlenecks in their receiving process and proposed solutions that could increase throughput by 20%. Sarah approved implementing my suggestions immediately. "This is exactly why we brought you here," she told me after reviewing my analysis. "You don't just see what needs to be done, you see how to do it better." The recognition felt incredible, but it also felt familiar. I'd been solving problems and improving systems for years. The difference was that now I was in an environment where those contributions were valued and rewarded rather than taken for granted. My personal life in Columbus developed more quickly than I'd expected. The apartment complex hosted monthly mixers for new residents, and I met several other young professionals who'd relocated for career opportunities. Within a month, I had a regular group of friends and had started exploring the city's restaurant and entertainment options. But the real test of my new independence came 6 weeks after my arrival, when Dad called with what he described as a household emergency. "Marcus, I hate to bother you, but we're having some issues with the sprinkler system and I can't figure out what's wrong." "What kind of issues?" "Some zones aren't turning on, others are running too long, and there's water pooling in weird spots." I walked him through basic troubleshooting over the phone, checking the controller settings, examining the sprinkler heads for clogs or damage, looking for obvious leaks in the lines. I think you might have a broken valve in Zone 3, I concluded, after his descriptions. And it sounds like someone reprogrammed the controller incorrectly. Can you walk me through fixing it? I spent 20 minutes on the phone helping Dad reset the sprinkler system and identify the broken components he'd need to replace. When we finished, there was a pause before he spoke again. Marcus, I owe you an apology. For what now? For calling you with this problem. You moved to Columbus to start a new life, not to be our long-distance maintenance consultant. I was quiet for a moment, surprised by his awareness of the boundary he'd crossed. But more than that, Dad continued, I owe you an apology for never realizing how much you knew about maintaining our home. Walking me through this problem, I could hear how much expertise you'd developed over the years. Knowledge I never acknowledged or appreciated. Dad, it's okay to ask for help sometimes. It's not okay to take advantage of your generosity just because I never bothered to learn these things myself. I should have hired someone local instead of calling you. The conversation marked another shift in our relationship. Dad was learning to see me as an independent adult with my own life and priorities, rather than as an extension of his household resources. Over the following months, our family communication found a healthier rhythm. Dad would update me on how household projects were progressing, often with pride about problems he'd solved independently. Devin would call to tell me about his increasing responsibilities and his plans to eventually move out and start his own life. The most significant call came in late September, when Devin announced he'd been promoted to shop manager at the garage and was looking at apartments. I talked to Dad about it, and we agreed it's time, Devin said. I've been living there rent-free for too long, and I need to actually become independent instead of just playing at being an adult. How's Dad handling that? Better than I expected. He's actually proud that both his sons are making their own way now. Says it means he raised us right, even if it took him a while to figure out how to show it. In October, I received a surprise package from home. Inside was a framed photo of our family from before Mom died, along with a note from Dad. Marcus, found this while cleaning out Mom's things. Thought you should have it. She always said you were the one who got her organizational skills and her eye for what needed fixing. I should have listened to her better. I should have seen what she saw. Love, Dad. The note brought tears to my eyes, partly for the mother I still missed, but mostly for the father who was finally learning to see me clearly. As my first year in Columbus drew to a close, I reflected on everything that had changed. I'd been promoted again at work, this time to regional logistics coordinator with responsibility for 3 distribution centers. I'd finished my business degree through online classes and was considering pursuing a bachelor's degree part-time. I'd also been dating someone seriously for the first time in years, Amanda, a marketing manager I'd met through the apartment complex, Mixer. She was smart, funny, and completely unimpressed by family drama, which I found refreshing. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned what it felt like to be valued for who I was rather than punished for what I wasn't. When I called home for Christmas planning, Dad had news that surprised me. Devin's engaged, he announced, to Sarah from the auto parts store. They're planning a spring wedding. That's great. I'm happy for them. Marcus, I want you to know, you're the best man if you want to be. Devin specifically asked me to make sure you knew you were his first choice. The gesture meant more than Dad probably realized. After years of being the overlooked brother, being chosen for such an important role felt like final proof that our family dynamics had truly changed. As I hung up from that call, I looked around my apartment, my space, furnished with my choices, organized according to my preferences. On my desk was a photo of me receiving my Employee of the Year award from the logistics company. On my refrigerator was a business card from the realtor who'd been helping me look at houses to buy. I thought about the conversation that had started all of this, Dad demanding rent while celebrating Devin's car purchase. At the time, it had felt like the final proof that I would never be valued in my own family. Instead, it had been the catalyst that forced all of us to confront the truth about our relationships and choose what kind of family we wanted to be. Sometimes, the best thing that can happen to you is learning that you're strong enough to walk away from a situation that doesn't serve you. Because only when people realize they might lose you, do they start figuring out how much you're actually worth. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they learn to treat you accordingly before it's too late to matter. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.